What do you think is happening in the country? What about the problem of the blue collar worker? The studies I've seen from, I think, Secretary of Labor Reich was saying the real standard of living has not been increasing. Is that,
No,
what do your statistics show?
that is true, beyond question. There has been a growing gap between the haves and the have-nots in this nation. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and we're losing out within the middle class. The middle class has been shrinking. One reason for that, I feel in my own mind, is the fact that the labor movement as a whole has been declining in terms of its percentage of the workforce which is organized. Back in the 50s, we reached a figure of about 35% of the total workforce organized within unions. There's no question that collective bargaining at that point gave the opportunity for improving living standards. Today it stands at a little under 15%, and in the industrial sector, only about 11%, in part because of the introduction of new technology, in part also because of what happened since the Reagan-Bush administrations and the antagonism that employers have exemplified in their anti-union tactics, beating down the unions, and the difficulties that exist at the collective bargaining table in matters such as health care, as one example. So that what has been happening is that one of the main forces in our national economy, which has meant building up a middle class and seeing to it that there is consuming power to buy back the goods we produce, has been weakened. We have to re-strengthen the labor movement.
Well, now, in your period, when you were active in the UAW, generally there would be a rise in standard of living. And now you're saying that's not happening.
That's right.
So that brings all kinds of problems. But what about it? Are we shifting from an industrial economy to some other kind of an economy, a hamburger economy or something? Secretary of Labor Reich said we not only have to work hard and by the rules, but got to work smart. What is happening to the economy?
This son of ours, with whom I co-authored the book Negotiating the Future, had previously, some years ago, co-authored a book called The Deindustrialization of America, dealing with what's been happening on that front. Now, we are still an industrialized country. With the introduction of advanced technology, we've been able to increase our great growth of productivity at a pretty decent pace, although not as good as we would like. And we've done that by the introduction of capital investment and equipment, which in effect has created less need for workers who in the past were the semi-skilled and the non-skilled. So we're shifting from the need for the industrial worker in the old sense to someone who is better trained to meet the skill requirements of the new technology. What Secretary of Labor Bob Reich has been advocating is that the government and industry have an obligation to see to it that this training is made available so that people indeed can perform the jobs which the future holds in store for them. The right-wing Newt Gingrich types are opposed to that. And by comparison, in Germany, for instance, there is a law which requires that kind of training in skill enhancement to be undertaken.
What about the 50-year-old laid-off auto worker? For example, Dodge, Maine is no longer in existence.
Right.
What do you do with that situation?
I am not at all convinced that the 50-year-old is untrainable. We have found time and time again that people are trainable regardless of age. The question, of course, is that the downsizing, which has been taking place, there's reason for that, true, as new technology comes into place. The question is, at the point that people are losing their jobs by reason of that, what are we doing as a nation to see to it that they are retrained and that we are creating the kind of capital investment which will allow them to seek out jobs which will retain their living standards? And we're not doing that as a nation.
I learned to use the word process in the last year,
Okay.
which has increased my productivity. Now, going back to, your work with Walter Reuther. Do you want to tell a little more about his, not only his global, but his relationship he had with FDR, Harry Truman, LBJ, the Vietnam War, some general comments on what was happening in the whole economy? Well, Governor Williams, Senator Hart, Senator McNamara, Blair Moody, people that we all knew at that period of time that I know he was close to. You want to know how close was he to them? Did they consult him, or what was the relationship?
With most of these whose names you have mentioned, he had a good relationship, and one in which, yes, they sought out ideas that he might have. By way of example, when we got into the war in World War II, and Walter came up with the idea of converting the plants to the production of airplanes, 500 planes a day. Of course, the industry, the auto industry, said, not on your life, we're going to continue to build automobiles. But Walter was able to move to people in Washington, including FDR, who were influential. And it was established and proven that, in fact, we could convert the auto industry. Willow Run was a darn good example of it. Time and time again, Walter had meetings with people who were in the forefront of legislative work or leadership, political leadership within the country, to talk about issues. Even something like the Peace Corps was something he discussed with John F. Kennedy. And Kennedy adopted it, and sure enough, we have a Peace Corps. All kinds of subject matter and issues of national significance, which Walter designed and then came to bring to these people and present it to them.
I'd like some more of these specifics. I know you were involved when you're working with Walter on many of these concepts that people just haven't heard about. When Doug Frazier was here, he told us how really what was done to save Chrysler. Now, for instance, the Peace Corps, the conversion, generally I remember about that, but would you elaborate some more on the ideas that came out of the UAW that were not just wages, hours, and working conditions, but were much more?
There were many such. Walter, for instance, as I said, had this broader vision of national need. One of them had to do with the environment. It was clear and established that Lake Erie was a dead lake. We knew that the environmental problems were increasing in significance and would have an impact upon the life that we lead. As a result, Walter, as president of the union, mobilized and organized a series of conferences along the Great Lakes having to do with cleaning up the lakes, getting a decent environment. And it got a lot of publicity at the time and alerted people to what was going wrong and what had to be done about it. As one example, even in a personal way, for instance, when Walter and May lived up in Rochester, there was a brook that ran near their home, and it was clogged. Walter and May organized the community to come out on weekends and clean it up. It was a matter that was important to him, not only in terms of personal life right now where I am, but the life of the nation as a whole. And that's just one example of many.
I remember often workers were told, you want to fish or work?
Well, that's essentially...
And he wanted to do both.
That's right. He was a salmon fisher.
Is there some more? We're about ready to wrap up. It's been very good to hear you. And Irv, I know there are many, many more stories you have. Is there anything you want to wind up with at this point?
Well, we can wind up with so many different anecdotes. I'd put it this way. Walter would say time and time again to business, we have more in common than we have in conflict. Okay, we'll fight over some things, but let's look at where we also have common problems and see if we can't work them out. And today we see joint action processes just growing like topsy around the country, leading in that direction. Walter also, of course, took that wonderful position with regard to the social issues that are important not only to the labor movement, but to the nation as a whole, which we've talked about. And in that regard, I think his legacy goes not only to what he did at the collective bargaining table, but what he did for the nation as a whole.